Merry
Alrighty.
Christmas, man. Thank you for this.
Same to you, man.
All right. I would like to bring in my next guest, another, if I can get to it. There we are. Another good friend of the show who I deeply appreciate joining me today because I needed his context. I hit him up yesterday. I was like, this doesn't even sound right. Michael Maloof. He is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal experience in the U.S. Department of Defense. Well, Merry Christmas, man. How you doing today? You doing all
Well,
right?
same to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So I brought you on because I needed some context on the attack, on the Houthi attack. So the UK, the United States, launched a withering attack on Yemen. Yemen, in retaliation for that attack, and I guess there were multiple things. Yemen attacked Tel Aviv, the UK and the United States hit them back. But in response, the Houthis apparently fired, I believe they said 8 missiles, several drones, and somewhere along the way, the Houthis claim we took down a F-18. The military, the U.S. military said, well, there was a friendly fire mistake where we knocked the plane out of the sky by accident, but the pilots were able to abandon the airplanes. And I think my first thing was like, okay, well, was it even possible for the Houthis to do that with drones and cruise missiles? Give me your take on that. I mean, are the Houthis lying? What's more likely to be true? Is it more likely to be friendly fire, or the Houthis more likely to have taken down that plane?
Yeah, yeah. CENTCOM said that the plane was hit shortly after takeoff. That's from CENTCOM, and that it was down due to friendly fire. I don't know that the Houthis had all they had were drones and maybe a few ballistic missiles that were aimed at the ships, but they did not have ground to air systems in action that I'm aware of. And the fact that this aircraft was downed just after takeoff suggests to me that the ordnance on the aircraft carrier, as well as the surrounding ships, because it is a strike group out there, they probably there was probably lead flying everywhere, using Gatling guns, which shoot 6,000 rounds a minute. And I wouldn't doubt that they just got into the crosshairs or into the crossfires, I should say, of trying to down these drones that were coming in. I don't think that they were taken down by the Houthis, that this aircraft was taken down by the Houthis. Now, it's still subject to further investigation, but for CENTCOM to claim that it was due to friendly fire is a major admission. But again, I didn't. That sounded about right to me because, again, speculation. But there was no assessment that the Houthis were using ground-to-air missiles, which would be against aircraft flying that I was aware of, and especially since it just had taken off from the aircraft carrier, according to CENTCOM. So now, if it was flying near Sana'a, the capital, maybe that's a possibility, but that's not where the location was of this aircraft at the time of having been allegedly shot down.
Yeah, for some reason I remember reading somewhere that they got confused because of the drone attack that was coming in. Like because I agree with you. It sounds like they were shooting at the drones to take the drones down, and somehow accidentally hit the ship. Now the Gatling guns, so the guns on the ships themselves, do they have friend versus foe type device? So that's only on the missile systems, meaning the guns.
They have a guidance. They can lock in. They can lock in. It'd be done manually or by computer, by tracking it. But let's say they were firing and the plane's taking off, and another ship on nearby was shooting at an incoming drone, and the plane happened to cross into that direction. Anything is possible. I mean, because you got lead flying. Look, 6,000 rounds a minute. One Gatling gun could shoot, and that's just the Gatling gun. That doesn't include the missiles. Now, I suspect it was down that the aircraft was down by a Gatling gun to take down the drone, and that's what's normally used. We do use more expensive for ballistic missiles. We'll use the more expensive upgraded missiles. But if a drone, which is slow, is coming in toward a ship, that to me is probably what's used, and maybe even a missile. But it sounds more like it was the Gatling gun effect, and because of the fact that there was reportedly an accidental shoot down.
Yeah.
And,
wow.
They just,
That is,
it's unlike the Ukrainian F-16 that was shot down, which, from what I can gather, did not have a transponder on, and it was a Ukrainian ground-to-air missile that downed that F-16 initially when they got the F-16s and were putting them into operation, and it downed their top F-16 pilot, and so the transponder apparently was not functioning, or it wasn't turned on, that allowed the ground to air missiles to have a recognition, or it may not have even been programmed, for all I know. So
they might not even know.
We just don't know yet, and there's never been any follow-up story on that, by the way.
Yeah, that's been buried. That's been buried. They just kind of moved on for that one. I'm curious, when they're launching cruise missiles, because the Houthi said they launched several cruise missiles also. Those were aimed at the ship, not the airplane, correct?
Yeah. The cruise missile, and they're slow. They're relatively slow, and you're not going to have a cruise missile is not going to be shooting down an aircraft that's just launched from the deck of an aircraft carrier. Those drones and cruise missiles are meant to be aimed at the ships, per se. That's what the Houthis were saying that they were targeting, were the ships, not the aircraft.
Yeah,
and you're talking about a considerable distance.
Oh, right. I assume they were just in the coast. Well, right. They said they were in the Red Sea, and you're right. Those planes can take off from a considerable distance. That's such a good point. So they said they launched 8 cruise missiles, 17 drones. And so those things were probably shot down in the process of trying to shoot it down. They accidentally knocked down their own plane in the process.
They could have knocked down their own plane. That's my assessment.
Wow.
Based upon what I've heard.
Give me your take on something. How the Houthis, I mean, the United States, they've been doing this kind of, what is it, Operation Prosperity Garden, or something to that effect. I believe the name of the operation is. They've been doing this for nearly a year, if not more than a year at this point, in order to stop the Houthis. A few years ago, the Houthis were literally in starvation because of the war they were having with Saudi Arabia. And now they're launching missiles that are going at hypersonic speeds. How are they doing that? Like, how is this Iran giving them something behind the scenes? Like, how on earth have they been able to make this kind of military jump over the course of this very short period of time like this, especially for something this sophisticated in regards to weapons? They launched a missile that hit Tel Aviv yesterday.
Yeah.
Which is, again, astonishing. This is not like, it seems like that accuracy has gotten far more specific and far better over the course of this last year. How are they getting this level of technological development this fast?
I wouldn't doubt that they're getting outside help, but they also have an indigenous capability. They've always had it, starting with the old Scud Cs that the Houthis acquired when they took over the capital, and they've been running those for years. I'm sure they have their own indigenous development programs, but also receiving outside technical assistance and know-how, and so I think it's just inevitable that they would do it. We've for our part, we've helped increase the capabilities of other countries doing the same thing. So, and we basically have provided a lot of that technological know-how, let's say, to China over time. Now they're developing stealth systems I can almost trace the U.S. exports. There were three of them that we gave in the 90s to the Chinese that gave them the basis to develop their stealth program, and they built upon that ever since, and then acquired further assistance and know-how. These countries are not as isolated as we think they are, like Russia or China, due to sanctions. Forget it. I mean, there is an ability to acquire. When I was in Russia recently, I saw so many foreign cars on the roads and late cars, late model cars, and I'm thinking, and the grocery stores are stocked, and people are going about their everyday lives like it's a normal day, and I'm thinking, sanctions? What sanctions?
You were in Kazan of all places, and I'm glad you
Yeah.
mentioned it, because Kazan was just hit by a drone. I guess it was a
Few
series of
drones.
drones.
Yeah.
And apparently there were, I mean, again, this had no military significance at all to it. From your take, why Kazan? I mean, apparently there were multiple attacks over the course of in Kursk region, also in Kazan itself. Why do you think it was Kazan? Do you think it was just a terror target? Do you think there was any kind of significance to it? Give me your thoughts. I mean, my first thought was bricks, but I wasn't necessarily sure. Give me your
Well,
thoughts. You were there.
I was as you point out, I was there in October for the BRICS summit, and I was covering that for RT as a contributor. And there was a lot of jamming going on at that time because there were something like 40 world leaders who had shown up for the BRICS conference, and so there was a lot of electronic jamming going on out of concern for the very thing that happened a few days ago, and that is drone attacks. And if you'll recall, you and I were supposed to have a chat while I was in Kazan, and I couldn't get through because the internet was jammed at the time, so I couldn't make it. You probably thought I was kidding at the time, but now this really underscores the importance of why they were so cautious, even in Kazan. In Kazan is the fifth largest Russian city. It's the capital of Tartarstan, and it's older. The city itself is older than the city of Moscow, and it is a crossroads between a trade crossroads, if you will, between China and the West through Russia, historically. I think even Ivan the Terrible turned up there at one point, and that was what, 13th or 14th
Yeah.
century.
Like
a little
thousands
before
of years
my
ago.
time. Yeah, a little before my time. But the significance of it is that it is a provincial city. It's a capital. They actually have what they call the Kazan Kremlin there. It's a walled city. It's an ancient city, and they have a mosque and they have an Eastern Orthodox church side by side, and people go and visit. You can visit them. It displayed how Muslims and Christians have lived in harmony for centuries together in Kazan, and it is predominantly a Muslim controlled area, and this is one of the attributes that Putin points to as to how they have all of these ethnicities and various religious groups with embodied within the Russian Federation. I think that is a very significant thing. They have them of all stripes there, and it's just like it's in effect like a melting pot, if you will, just as we are. I think we're more of a melting pot because of the folks that come around the world to us. But they can show a lot of diversity in their society, even in Russia, and even though it's in the more western part of Russia, it's more Eastern Orthodox. and you readily see that, particularly in Moscow, St. Petersburg. Um, but Kazan is about 800 miles inside from Ukraine, and I think the latest display of shooting drones there, even though there was no apparent military target, there was no military objective. It hit civilian high rise there in an area which was near where I was staying. But it was to demonstrate by drone, a domestically produced drone by the Ukrainians, that they have a long range capability, and it's much longer than the ATACMS that they want. The benefit of the ATACMS is speed. And as a consequence, they are able to be able to still wreak damage and havoc if they want to.
Well, it's wild. I was showing this picture earlier. It looked like, honestly, it looked almost like 9/11. I mean, granted, it didn't have the same impact because it was a drone. It didn't have the same significance or the right here. Here it is, just for the audience, just in case the audience wasn't here earlier today. This basically a residential building.
Yeah.
I mean that it really did. I mean for Americans, it evokes this kind of 9/11 feel to it, just in the way it looks like an airplane just hitting the building itself, which is astonishing. There's something else I want to hit you with too. So the military recently, right here, this. Apparently the number of troops that we're sending to Syria is double, apparently, than what the military believed. I have no idea why they don't know how many troops, but maybe you can answer this. I want to play the clip, and I want to get your take on it.
To bring up one item, as you know, we have been briefing you regularly that there are approximately 900 U.S. troops deployed to Syria. In light of the situation in Syria and the significant interest, we recently learned that those numbers were higher. And so asked to look into it. I learned today that, in fact, there are approximately 2,000 U.S. troops in Syria. As I understand it, and as it was explained to me, these additional forces are considered temporary rotational forces that deploy to meet shifting mission requirements, whereas the core 900 deployers are on longer deployments. As you know, for many of our deployments, numbers will fluctuate from time to time, but given that this number is significantly higher than what we've been briefing.
Well, not just significantly higher, like more than double the amount that he was saying that was there before. I mean, that's a significant jump. I mean, like, it's one thing to say, okay, we have 900 core troops. Okay, but this is a double than the number of troops that you had prior. How could they not know how many people they had in Syria? Or is what he is saying a legitimate excuse for how they got this so wrong?
I think I don't believe a word they say. They have to know, because they have to cut the orders. They have to move people around. I think they were basically hiding this fact prior to the elections, but they had to have been there prior to the elections. And so, but the Pentagon was just keeping it quiet. They didn't want to do anything that's going to upset everybody more than they already have, and particularly with what would constitute an expansion of the war. But they are sitting ducks. They are much more susceptible to attacks from not only the Sunnis but also the Shia coming in from Iraq. Oh.
You're fine. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm super. Oh,
I have a incoming that I'm going to have to take. Oh, but
perfectly fine. Michael, thank you for this, man.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Let's talk.
No, I really appreciate it. You have a good one. All right. Ended a little soon, but that's okay. I do appreciate him. I asked him to come on and have a conversation about the building and the viability of whether or not the Houthis had the chance to take down the building. So fair enough. He gave me 20, and I am deeply appreciative of him for it. The other story I was going to hit Maloof with, and I'll just go through the story now, because I don't think the troop numbers are completely arbitrary. This was reported. Syrian rebel Ahmed al-Shara. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, who the hell is al-Shara? Who's al-Shara? What do you mean Syrian leader al-Shara? I thought Gilani was in charge. Well, Gilani is in charge because al-Shara is Gilani. He has effectively got rid of his battle name and is now going by al-Shara. Now, he is standing there. If you notice, well, they may not show it on this video, but he is here with the Turkish foreign minister. And they're having a great conversation. They seem to be thick as thieves as they're talking and all this other good stuff. Good, right there. In this conversation, one of the things that he points out, well, for one, it's clear that Turkey and al-Jilani, or Shara, whatever he wants to call himself, Ahmed al-Shara, are very tight, thick as thieves, regardless of Turkey saying they didn't have anything to do with it. It just happened. We didn't know anything about it. But now, of course, Turkey is strongly insisting that sanctions need to be removed, that Erdogan is pointing out, well, we need to do something about terrorists. And they go further. If you remember on the show, I think it was last week, I had Esteban on the show. And Esteban pointed out that there are thousands of ISIS fighters that are in detainment, in prison. And that as the jihadists gets closer, what are they going to do? I mean, keep in mind, many of these guys were ISIS. Many of these guys are still ISIS. And what are they going to do when they come across a prison? Are they going to let their people go? Or for that matter, are they going to let their people join the terrorist state? All right. One of the conversations that they had, and that Jelani seems to be strongly insisting, is that he can be trusted, that the West has nothing to fear from him. And one of the things that he pointed out was that he was going to get rid of all of the weapons and put all of those weapons under the state apparatus. That this is what he's going to do all across the country. So right here, Syria's armed faction will be dissolved in an international army with all weapons coming under state control. The country's de facto leader, Ahmed al-Shara, or al-Jilani, as he is commonly known, said on Sunday at the press conference with the Turkish foreign minister, Hakan Fidan. Shara said that the measure also applied to groups in areas controlled by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. Basically, groups that are backed by the U.S. Groups that are backed by the U.S. So, if you remember Blinken, well, there were a few things. One, after they took over the Syrian government, there were clashes between Kurdish forces backed by the United States, basically jihadists backed by the U.S., and jihadists backed by Turkey or Turkey, choose whatever you want to call it. And in these clashes, the better trained, better equipped Turkish-backed jihadists were beating the stuffing out of the U.S.-backed jihadists. So Blinken goes over. Apparently, there is a deal. The deal is somewhat short-lived because they were still losing territory to the Turkish-backed groups. Now, Erdogan has come out and is effectively like, look, we are not going to accept terrorists in Syria. Al-Jilani, or Shara, the name change. I want to hit the name change for after a bit. But first, he points out that all groups, be it Hezbollah affiliates, all groups will have to leave if they're not necessarily going to be part of Syria. He continues that rhetoric with, we are going to disarm every group that is in Syria. All factions need to give up their weapons. And if they're going to be militarized, they will have to join the Syrian army. So his first thought is, we need to get rid of all competition. There's so many groups that are affiliated with HTS when they overthrew the government. Many of those groups have different ideas. They have different tolerances in regards to what they accept versus what they don't accept. And so you can imagine that Jelani is like, all right, this is problematic, and I need to somehow ensure control and stability for the state. And so, in order to do that, I need to disarm the other groups that are competitors that may cause an issue for me and my power base in this country. Now, he is supposed to be having elections, and there's a question of whether or not he would even give up power if he lost in the elections. But put that to the side for the moment. That's a big deal. Part of the reason that's a big deal is because currently they are still fighting with Kurdish forces. Now, I pointed out earlier that more likely than not, they're going to want to take over all of Syria. The most expensive, or let's say the most prosperous regions of Syria were being held by the Kurdish forces at the behest of the United States. So the areas of the oil, or for that matter, the wheat, part of the reason that the US did that is because at the point where their terrorists were losing, well, they decided we need to hold on to the oil and wheat in order to deprive this element from the Syrian government. So we're going to starve the population of energy, and we're going to starve them of food. And that's what they did. They did for years. And so the Kurdish forces were basically stealing the oil, and American forces that were on the ground were stealing the oil. As Trump said that day, we're stealing the oil, we're stealing the oil. All right. So I have a hard time believing that a group that is backed by Turkey, that has overthrown the Syrian government, that is now taking out the Kurds, the same Kurds that the Turkish government considers to be terrorists, and that Jelani has just pointed out will be disarmed. Full stop. And you can imagine that Turkey is going to back them wholeheartedly in disarming the group that Turkey considers to be a terrorist. Now, the catch becomes, what does the US do? The fact of the matter is the US, as the general pointed out, or whoever the spokesperson is, only has, 2,000 people in the country, which is more than twice the amount than they originally said that they had in the country itself. And I would imagine that basically came to a head where they had to out that information. So there's a question to be asked of, okay, what does the US do? Is the US going to go to war with Turkish-backed jihadists? And more to the point, not just are they going to go to war with Turkish-backed jihadists. I mean, Turkey has taken this perspective that we have nothing to do with that government. We'll help them. We can help them. And we had nothing to do with the overthrow of Syria. Okay, nobody believes this. Certainly the United States doesn't believe this. But one of the benefits of having a proxy is that the proxy can touch things that you can't necessarily touch directly. And so there's a question of whether or not the U.S. is going to stand by the Kurds, or whether the U.S. is going to allow the Kurds to get crushed. Now, there is some level of diplomatic work that Blinken is doing that doesn't necessarily seem to be all that effective. Those groups are still going after the Kurdish forces. And again, from Erdogan's position, he wants all of Syria. And at the point where the United States has invaded the country and is occupying the most, let's say, oil-rich regions of that country, why would he accept the U.S. forces remaining in Syria now that he's been able to get rid of Bashar al-Assad, and that he wants, for all intents and purposes, to be able to take it all? Now, of course, Israel has taken a portion of Syria, but there's a question of whether or not the Kurds are going to be left in the lurch, especially when Donald Trump gets in office, because there's rumors that Donald Trump wants to pull out of Syria. And if indeed Trump wants to pull out of Syria, then the full responsibility of taking care of the, let's say, the ISIS fighters is going to fall to HTS, and which is effectively now Syria. What's wild about that is that the Turkish foreign minister has pointed out that HTS is prepared and ready to occupy state power, meaning take over the state. And they're also ready to take control of the terrorists in those prisons that the Kurdish forces were guarding. So they are making moves. Now, part of the moves that they're also making is trying to get rid of the sanctions. Because, again, part of the thing that crushed Bashar al-Assad were the sanctions. I mean, they were paying their military like $20 a month compared to the, $1,500 a month that they were getting from the standpoint of back by Turkish and the U.S. forces when they overthrew the Syrian government. So their first thought is, we need to get the state up and running. In order to get the state up and running, we need to get rid of the sanctions. Now, al-Jilani has traded his Zelensky-esque outfit for a suit. And in rocking the suit, he is saying, look, we need to remove the sanctions. Those sanctions were part of the old government. We are the new government. And he's trying to make this argument that, look, we are the victors. We are the people who are the oppressed. And because we were the people who are the oppressed, you should not put sanctions on the oppressed as you had on the oppressor. Now, the reason he can use this argument is because that's the argument that the West effectively used in order to back him, despite the fact there's a $10 million bounty on his head that is still there, that Joe Biden or the Biden administration is considering to removing. Now, we will see how this pans out, but the truth of the matter is it sounds like the Kurds are going to get screwed over again. I have a hard time believing that Erdogan is going to be okay with allowing the Kurdish forces to remain in the country now that his proxy has effectively overthrown and taken control of the state apparatus in its entirety. Yes, Israel. They may not necessarily come to odds with Israel anytime soon, but from the standpoint of the SDF, they consider them to be terrorists and they want them gone. And so I'm not quite sure how much influence or pull the United States is going to have at this situation. Up to this point, it doesn't seem like they've had much pull at all in order to stem the hand of Turkish proxies to get rid of the Kurds. It's just fascinating. I mean, like they have fundamentally taken the country. And I'm super curious on whether or not the U.S. is going to remove A, the sanctions, or B, the bounty on his head. Now, they may keep those sanctions with the idea that we'll remove the sanctions if you leave the Kurds to their devices, meaning that may be the leverage that they use in order to try to stem his hand on some of this stuff. And of course, they've also, Europe anyway, has pointed out that we will remove the sanctions if you can attend to human rights or if you can attend to the elections, those type of things, basically using a carrot and stick approach and trying to control the group. Whether that's going to work, I have no idea. But that is the situation in Syria right now. He is saying he is going to disarm every armed faction that is in Syria, and that all of those armed factions are going to have to come under the auspices of the government itself. Will the other armed groups accept that? That is also an open question. Meaning, will they accept themselves being depowered and being disarmed, especially if there's disagreements between the leadership and the rest of the groups that are there, or some of the groups that are there? It's just fascinating in the way that this is breaking down. We'll see.